Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a seriously fascinating era, the early 1900s. We're going to explore a time when society was completely obsessed with maintaining this pristine, effortless facade, deliberately hiding the grinding gears of everyday reality. But at the exact same time, they were cheering for shockingly brutal public spectacles right in the bright light of day.
Let's really unpack this, because the early 1900s were defined by this stark, engineered duality. Think about it. On one hand, true luxury meant entirely erasing any trace of human labor. If you had to actually see the people keeping your world running, well, that just wasn't luxury. But then, on the very same day, those same elites would pack into massive stadiums, literally putting raw, unabashed violence on a pedestal for mass entertainment.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll explore the architecture of invisibility, Chicago's secret freight network, the public spectacle of brutality, baseball in the deadball era, and finally, what we'll call the legacy of two worlds.
First up, let's look at the architecture of invisibility and the two cities of the Gilded Age. We're starting at the turn of the century in the sprawling estates of Newport in the Carolinas. The ultra-wealthy elite literally built two cities into every single mansion, one entirely for display and one strictly for labor. Up above, the owners are enjoying these soaring 20-foot ceilings, French limestone, and air perfumed with flowers. But below, an invisible army of, say, 40 to 80 servants is navigating this dark, claustrophobic labyrinth. Down there, the air hung heavy with a very distinct chemical character, basically a mix of anthracite coal dust and damp salt air. It was a completely parallel architectural world living right under their feet.
And the engineering deployed just for silence? It's honestly incredible. Builders achieved an estimated 20 decibels of acoustic dampening simply by packing earth backfill right between the brick vaulting of the service corridors and the wooden floor joists above. They even set the coal delivery rails at precisely 15-degree inclines, greasing them heavily with tallow. Why? So gravity would do all the heavy lifting, ensuring not a single metallic squeal ever reached the guests upstairs.
Now, architecture created the physical concealment, sure, but brutal contract law is what enforced it. Servants were strictly confined to these scheduled, silent routes. They even relied on pneumatic tubes for communication instead of traditional bells that might, make an audible noise. And the stakes here were incredibly high. If a servant was ever caught just walking through a guest corridor during entertaining hours, that meant instant dismissal. Zero appeal, no second chances, you were just gone.
Next, let's zoom out to Chicago's secret freight network, a literal underground city. You see, this whole desire for invisibility expanded from individual mansions to an industrial-scale need to hide the grime of the working world in a bustling metropolis. Chicago essentially built a mirror city 40 feet underground. By 1914, there were 60 miles of narrow-gauge railway tunnels weaving beneath the city streets. We're talking 132 electrical locomotives and over 3,000 freight cars. This massive system was designed to quietly remove excavation debris, move merchandise, and deliver colossal amounts of coal totally out of sight from the busy world above.
Just look at the precision of this hidden logistics network. Coal was dumped directly from the surface into trackside bins, where a tunnel car could be loaded with 3.5 tons of coal in 2 seconds flat. From there, it was hauled silently through the 60-mile network and lifted straight up into the deep basements of these towering buildings via vertical bucket conveyors. It was perfectly engineered to fuel the massive skyscrapers above without a single pedestrian ever hearing a cart or seeing even a speck of coal dust on the sidewalk. Talk about out of sight, out of mind.
Now, let's pivot to the public spectacle of brutality, specifically momentum football.
Leaving the hidden, heavily regulated world of labor, we step right into the daylight, where violence was loudly, proudly celebrated by thousands of cheering fans. In the 1890s, before modern rules existed, college football was basically warfare. Because there were no rules requiring players to be set before the snap, an entire team could start 20 yards back, get up to a full dead sprint, and form this tightly locked V-shaped mass. Then, they'd smash into a line of standing defenders at absolute full speed. This play, called the flying wedge, was actually invented by a chess player named Laurent F. Deland, who literally applied Napoleon's military flank strategies directly to the football field.
The only way to stop a mass momentum play like that? Throwing your own body directly at it. You had players like Walter Heffelfinger rushing at these literal mighty human engines, leaping high in the air and coming down on top of the guys inside the wedge to flatten them. And remember, they wore zero padding, just stocking caps on their heads. Thousands of fans just roared as college students were routinely crushed, all in the name of school honor.
You can easily trace the rapid escalation of this violence over a 20-year span. It kicks off with the V-Trick in 1884, and by 1894, it culminates in the infamous Hampden Park bloodbath between Yale and Harvard. That game left 8 players severely injured. We're talking guys unconscious for hours, broken limbs, snapped collarbones. It was so incredibly vicious that Harvard and Yale refused to play each other for 3 whole years. By 1905, the crisis hit a boiling point, with 19 on-field deaths, allegedly prompting President Theodore Roosevelt himself to step in and intervene.
So, to save the sport from being totally abolished, drastic rules were rolled out. They finally outlawed those mass momentum plays. They knocked the grueling game length from 90 down to 70 minutes. They also created the modern 10-yard kickoff rule to spread the players out. And, this is wild, they had to add a linesman specifically to look for hidden slugging, because players were secretly just punching each other in the scrums. This whole shift really marked the slow beginning of the heavily regulated game we recognize today.
Moving on to baseball in the dead ball era, or what we could call the thud of the diamond?
Football definitely wasn't the only public spectacle dealing with brutal realities. Early 1900s baseball was an absolutely grueling game of attrition. You might be wondering, why exactly do we call it the dead ball era? We all know it was a time of low scoring and very few home runs, but it wasn't just a style of play. It was the literal physical state of the baseball itself that made the game so incredibly difficult.
Baseballs back then had these rubber cores wrapped tightly in rough yarn. When hit, they didn't have that iconic crack. They just made this dull thud. But it gets worse. A single baseball was expected to stay in play for over 100 pitches. Pitchers would doctor it relentlessly with spit, dirt, and tobacco juice just to make it move erratically. By the late innings, the ball was this darkened, deformed, literally unraveling hazard, flying at 100 miles an hour toward batters who, by the way, did not even wear helmets.
Unfortunately, it took an absolute tragedy to finally change this. In 1920, Cleveland shortstop Ray Chapman was struck in the head and killed by a filthy, basically invisible spitball. This horrifying event forced the league to ban the spitball and mandate that umpires regularly replace dirty baseballs with fresh white ones. This single structural shift birthed the modern lively ball era we know today, allowing batters to finally see the ball and actually hit for power.
Finally, let's look at the legacy of two worlds and the foundation of modernity. As we pull all these threads together, we really start to see how the extreme contrasts of this era fundamentally shaped the 20th century. The whole philosophy of the two cities, that absolute insistence on hiding the messy, grueling logistics of labor underground, whether that was in a Newport mansion or right beneath the streets of Chicago, that became the ultimate blueprint for modern American infrastructure. At the exact same time, the push to take brutal, raw physical violence and tame it into these heavily regulated, spectator-friendly sports laid the very foundation for our modern entertainment industry.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If we go to such extraordinary architectural lengths to make the hard labor of everyday life completely invisible, all while enthusiastically cheering for spectacular violent impacts in a stadium, well, what does that reflection say about us? And what does it say about what we truly value today?